The Scribe of Vareth Elyndor had never felt like he belonged. Born into the household of a minor scribe in the city of Vareth, he had spent his childhood surrounded by the scent of parchment and ink, the steady scratching of quills, and the hushed murmur of scholars debating the laws that governed their world. From an early age he had been expected to follow in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, to become a scribe of the Order of the Pen, the esteemed institution that recorded the decrees of the Council of Elders and preserved the history of their society. It was a prestigious path, one that promised stability and respect, yet Elyndor had always felt a quiet unease, as though the world around him was a gilded cage, and he was the only one who saw the bars. Vareth was a city of order, of rigid hierarchy, and of unspoken rules. The Council of Elders, a group of noble scholars and administrators, ruled with an iron grip, ensuring that every citizen knew their place. The Order of the Pen, which Elyndor aspired to join, was more than just a record-keeping institution. It was the voice of the Council, the keeper of truth, and the enforcer of conformity. To deviate from the expected path was to invite suspicion, and to question the world's structure was to risk exile or worse. Yet, even as a boy, Elyndor had often found himself staring at the towering spires of the council hall, wondering what lay beyond the carefully maintained order of his world. As he grew older, the weight of expectation pressed heavier upon him. His father, stern and unyielding man, had made it clear that Elyndor's future was already decided. There was no room for hesitation, no space for curiosity. But the more he learned of the world, the more he questioned it. He had read the histories, the records of past rulers, and the accounts of those who had dared to challenge the council's authority. He had seen the way the scribes of the Order of the Pen wielded their pens like weapons, shaping the narratives of the people they served. And he had begun to wonder if the truth was not what the council claimed it to be. Despite his growing doubts, Elyndor had no choice but to follow the path laid before him. He trained under his father, mastering the art of transcription, the careful copying of decrees, and the meticulous recording of the council's rulings. He was expected to be a model of discipline, a loyal servant of the system. But beneath the surface, a quiet rebellion was taking root. He could not yet articulate it, but he knew that something within him was stirring, something that would not be silenced. The weight of the pen. The Order of the Pen was more than just a collection of scribes. It was the foundation upon which the society of Vareth was built. Every decree, every law, every edict that shaped the lives of its people was recorded and preserved by the scribes, ensuring that the Council of Elders remained the unchallenged authority over the city. To be a scribe was to be a guardian of order, a custodian of truth, and, in many ways, a silent enforcer of the council's will. Had been raised to believe that this was a noble duty, that his role was one of service and duty. And yet, as he delved deeper into the intricacies of the order, he could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. The scribes were not merely recorders of history, they were the architects of perception. The council's decrees were not written in plain language, but in carefully crafted prose, designed to shape the minds of the people who read them. The histories that Elyndor studied were not objective accounts, but carefully curated narratives, shaped to reinforce the council's authority and to suppress any notion of dissent. He had once asked his father why certain events were omitted from the records, only to be met with a stern rebuke. "The truth is not always what you think it is, Elyndor," his father had said, "and some truths are best left unspoken." Despite the restrictions placed upon him, Elyndor had begun to notice the cracks in the carefully maintained facade of order. He saw how the people of Vareth lived under the illusion of stability, how they accepted the council's rule without question, how they believed that their lives were shaped by the will of the rulers rather than by the silent hand of the scribes. He had once overheard a conversation between two scribes, speaking in hushed tones about a recent decree that had been altered before being sent to the people. It was a small thing, a minor change in wording, but it had the power to shift the perception of the law, to make it more palatable, more acceptable. Elyndor had been horrified. He had always believed that the Order of the Pen was a force for good, that they preserved the truth, that they ensured justice. But now he saw the reality. They were not merely recorders of history, but shapers of it. And if they could alter the past, if they could manipulate the words that dictated the lives of the people, then what was the truth? The weight of this realization pressed upon him, but he could not voice his doubts. To do so would be to invite suspicion, to risk his position within the order, and to endanger not only himself, but those who might share his questions. And yet, the more he learned, the more he felt the stirrings of something within him. A quiet, unspoken rebellion, a desire to seek the truth, even if it meant defying the very system he had been raised to serve, the hidden truth. It was late one evening when Elyndor found the manuscript. The archives of the Order of the Pen were vast, their shelves lined with brittle scrolls and bound tomes that had been copied and recopied for generations. Most of the records were carefully indexed, their contents accessible to those with the proper authority. But in the deepest recesses of the archives, where the light of the oil lamps barely reached, Elyndor had stumbled upon a section of the library that had been long forgotten shelves that had been left untouched, their contents sealed away in thick, dust-covered tomes. He had not meant to look there. He had been searching for a reference to an old decree, a document that had been referenced in a recent council meeting but was not listed in the official records. As he combed through the archives, his fingers brushed against the spine of a book that did not belong to the standard collection. The leather was cracked, the binding worn, and the title was barely legible. He pulled it from the shelf, his pulse quickening. The manuscript was unlike any he had ever seen. It was not a record of the council's decrees or the histories of the city. It was something else entirely, a collection of accounts written by scribes who had long since been erased from the records of Vareth. Their names had been struck from the annals of the Order, their contributions to the city's history buried beneath layers of carefully curated narratives. But here, in this forgotten tome, their voices remained. Elyndor's hands trembled as he turned the pages, his eyes scanning the words that had been hidden for so long. These scribes had not merely recorded history, they had questioned it. They had written of the council's manipulations, of the ways in which the Order had shaped the truth to serve the rulers rather than the people. They had spoken of the lives that had been lost to the council's decisions, of the ones who had been silenced, of the ones who had dared to challenge the system and been cast out. The weight of the discovery settled upon him like a stone. He had spent his life believing that the Order of the Pen was a noble institution, a guardian of truth. But now he saw the truth for what it was, a carefully constructed illusion, one that had been maintained by those who had once stood in the same position as he, and he was no longer certain of his place within it. The weight of truth. Elyndor sat in the dim light of his chamber, the manuscript resting on his lap, its pages whispering secrets that had long been buried. The words he had read gnawed at him, not because they were shocking, but because they were undeniable. The Order of the Pen had not been a guardian of truth, but a tool of the council, a silent hand shaping the lives of the people of Vareth. And now he held the evidence in his hands. A cold dread settled in his chest. What was he to do with this knowledge? If he spoke of it, if he revealed what he had found, he would be branded a traitor. The council would not tolerate dissent, not from a scribe, not from anyone. He had seen the fates of those who had questioned the Order before. Some had been cast out, exiled to the fringes of society, their names erased from the records. Others had vanished entirely, their existence reduced to a footnote in the annals of history. He had once believed that the Order was a force for good, but now he saw the truth. It was not a force for justice, but for control. Yet, even as the fear of retribution loomed, a deeper unease took hold of him. If he remained silent, if he allowed the truth to be buried once more, what would that make him? A scribe who had turned away from his duty? A man who had known the truth and chosen to let it remain hidden? The thought of that weighed heavily on him. He had spent his life believing in the Order, in the stability of Via, in the structure that had been built over generations. But now he saw the cracks in that foundation, the careful manipulations that had shaped the lives of the people he had once believed to be his equals. His mind raced with the possibilities. He could not simply destroy the manuscript. That would be an act of complicity, a betrayal of the voices that had been silenced before him. But to speak of it, to reveal the truth, would be to invite the wrath of the council. He had no allies within the Order, no one who would stand with him against the weight of the system he had been raised to serve. And yet, the more he thought of it, the more he felt the stirrings of something within him. A need to act, to do something, even if it meant risking everything. He had always believed that the Order of the Pen was a place of knowledge, of wisdom, of truth. But now he saw that it was also a place of silence, of suppression, of control. And if he did nothing, if he allowed the truth to remain hidden, then he would be no better than those who had come before him. He had the knowledge, he had the power, and for the first time he felt the weight of a choice that could not be ignored. The gathering storm. Elyndor's discovery had changed him, but it had not changed the world around him. If anything, the weight of the manuscript had made the world feel more oppressive, more suffocating. He had always known that the Council of Elders ruled with an iron grip, but now he saw the mechanisms of that control more clearly than ever before. The Order of the Pen was not merely an institution of record-keeping, it was an instrument of the Council's will, a silent enforcer of the status quo. And if the Order could shape history, then the Council could shape the future. He had begun to notice the subtle shifts in the world around him. The scribes who once moved through the halls of the Order with quiet confidence now seemed more cautious, their words measured, their expressions guarded. He overheard hushed conversations between senior scribes, their voices low with unease. He saw the way the younger scribes, those who had once been eager to prove themselves, now hesitated before speaking, their eyes darting toward the doors as if expecting to be caught in some unspoken transgression. And then there was the surveillance. It was not overt, not like the Council's agents who roamed the streets of Vareth, watching for dissent, for rebellion. It was more insidious, more difficult to detect. A scribe who asked too many questions was suddenly assigned to a more menial task, his access to the archives restricted. A scribe who seemed too interested in the records of the past was quietly reassigned to a different branch of the Order, his work no longer deemed important. Elyndor himself had felt the weight of these changes. He had begun to notice the way the other scribes looked at him, the way their eyes flickered with suspicion whenever he lingered too long near the archives. He had also noticed the way the Council's influence extended beyond the Order. The people of Vareth lived under the illusion of stability, but Elyndor could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The merchants who once spoke freely now hesitated before voicing their concerns, their words carefully chosen to avoid any mention of the Council's policies. The artisans and laborers who had once protested the Council's decrees had grown silent, their voices drowned out by the weight of fear. Even the common folk, those who had never questioned the system, now seemed to move with a wariness that had not been there before. And yet, the most unsettling realization was that the Council was not merely suppressing dissent, it was preparing for it. Elyndor had overheard a conversation between two scribes, one of whom had mentioned the Council's recent discussions on unrest among the people. He had not heard the full conversation, but the implication had been clear. The Council was not merely reacting to dissent, it was anticipating it. And if that was true, then the time for change was running out. Elyndor knew that if he did not act, if he did not find a way to reveal the truth, then the Council would continue to shape the world in its own image, suppressing any who dared to question it. But he also knew that the path ahead would be perilous. The Order of the Pen was not a place where dissent was tolerated. The Council did not allow its will to be challenged. And if he was to stand against them, he would need to do so carefully, with precision, with a plan. That would not only protect him, but also ensure that the truth was not buried once more. He had the manuscript, the evidence that could shatter the illusion of the Council's authority. But knowledge alone was not enough. He would need allies, people who understood the weight of the truth and who would not fear the consequences of speaking it. And he would need to act before the Council realized that he had discovered what they had tried so hard to keep hidden. The time for hesitation was over. The confrontation. The confrontation. The Council of Elders had gathered in the grand chamber of the Hall of Records, a vast domed room where the weight of history hung in the air like a silent judgment. The chamber was lined with towering shelves of ancient tomes, their spines cracked with age, their pages filled with the carefully curated narratives of Vareth's past. At the center of the room stood the Council's table, a long polished slab of dark wood that bore the insignia of the Order of the Pen. The Council members, draped in the heavy robes of their rank, sat in a semicircle, their faces impassive, their eyes fixed on the man who now stood before them. Elyndor had not come to the Council in a moment of recklessness. He had prepared for this confrontation, knowing that if he were to challenge the Council, he would need to do so with the weight of truth behind him. The manuscript was in his hands, its pages worn from the many times he had read it, its words etched into his memory. He had spent weeks gathering evidence, speaking in hushed tones with those who had once been scribes before him, those who had seen the Order's manipulations and had chosen to remain silent. He had found others who had questioned the Council's authority, who had dared to ask the questions that had been deemed too dangerous to voice. And now he stood before them, not as a servant of the Order, but as a man who had seen the truth and refused to let it be buried again. "I have come to speak the truth," Elyndor said, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Not as a scribe of the Order, but as a man who has seen the lies that have been woven into the fabric of our society." A murmur passed through the Council, a ripple of unease that did not reach the surface of that carefully maintained composure. The eldest of the Council members, a man whose face was lined with the years of his service, leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "You are a scribe of the Order of the Pen," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And yet you stand before us as if you would challenge the Council's authority." "I do not challenge the Council's authority," Elyndor said. "I challenge the lies that have been told in the name of the Council." He stepped forward, unrolling the manuscript before him, its pages spread open to reveal the accounts of the scribes who had been erased from history. "These are the voices that have been silenced. These are the truths that have been buried, and I have come to ensure that they are no longer forgotten." A low murmur of voices filled the chamber, some of the council members exchanging glances, their expressions dark with something that could not be named. The eldest member of the council rose from his seat, his movements slow but deliberate. "You are mistaken, Elyndor," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "The Order of the Pen is not a place for dissent. It is a place of order, of discipline, and you, as a scribe, have a duty to uphold that order." Elyndor's hands tightened around the edges of the manuscript. "My duty is to the truth," he said, "not to the lies that have been told in the name of the council." The council members exchanged glances, and for a moment it seemed as though they would dismiss him, as though they would not be named, as they had done to others before him. But then one of the younger members of the council, a woman whose name Elyndor did not know, stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of something unspoken. "You have read the accounts of the scribes who came before you," she said, "and you have seen the truth. But what would you do with that truth, Elyndor? What would you do if the council did not listen?" Elyndor looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had not expected this. He had not expected anyone to stand with him, to question the council's authority. But now he saw the possibility of something else, something that had not been in his mind before. The council was not a monolith, not a single entity that could not be challenged. There were those among them who had seen the cracks in the system, who had felt the weight of the lies that had been told in the name of the council. And if he could reach them, if he could show them the truth, then perhaps he could change the course of the order. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "If the council does not listen, then I will speak the truth to the people of Vareth," he said. "I will not let the lies be buried again. I will not allow the council to shape history in its own image, to silence those who have dared to question it." The chamber fell into silence, the weight of his words settling over the council like a storm on the horizon. The eldest member of the council rose, his expression unreadable. "You are a scribe of the order," he said, "and yet you have chosen to defy it." Elyndor met his gaze, his heart pounding. "I have chosen to uphold the truth," he said, "and I will not be silenced again." The council did not act immediately, but as Elyndor stepped back, the weight of the moment settling over him, he knew that the battle for the truth had only just begun. The legacy of the scribe. The council did not act immediately, but the weight of Elyndor's defiance lingered in the air like the scent of ink on parchment. The silence that followed his declaration was not one of fear nor of certainty. It was the silence of a world on the edge of change. The council had ruled for generations, shaping the course of Vareth with the steady hand of order and the unyielding grip of tradition. But now, for the first time in many years, their authority had been challenged, not by an uprising, not by a rebellion, but by a single scribe who had dared to speak the truth. In the days that followed, Elyndor was not exiled, nor was he punished. The council did not move against him with the immediate force that he had expected. Instead, they watched, they waited, and in that waiting, the world around him shifted. The scribes of the order, those who had once moved through the halls of the order with quiet confidence, now looked to him with something new in their eyes, curiosity, perhaps even hope. The younger scribes, those who had once feared speaking too loudly, now whispered among themselves, "There!" Voices carrying the weight of the questions that had long been unspoken. Elyndor did not know what the council intended, but he knew that the time for silence was over. He had spent his life believing in the Order of the Pen, in the idea that the scribes were the keepers of truth. But now he saw that they were not merely recorders of history, they were its architects. And if the council had allowed him to speak, if they had not yet acted against him, then perhaps the time had come for the people of Vareth to see the truth for themselves. He began to speak, not in the grand halls of the council, but in the streets of Vareth, in the quiet corners of the city where the people still gathered to hear the stories of their past. He spoke of the scribes who had been erased from history, of the council's manipulations, of the lies that had been woven into the fabric of their society. At first the people listened in silence, their faces unreadable. But as the days passed, as the words of the forgotten scribes found their way into the ears of the common folk, something shifted. The people of Vareth, who had once accepted the council's rule without question, began to question it. The council did not act swiftly, but they did not act at all. And in that inaction, Elyndor saw the first signs of change. The order of the pen, long a silent enforcer of the council's will, began to fracture. Some scribes still clung to the old ways, to the belief that the council's authority was unchallenged. But others, those who had seen the cracks in the system, began to question their role. And as the voices of the people grew louder, as the truth of the past found its way into the present, the council's grip on the city began to weaken. Elyndor did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if the council would fall, or if the people of Vareth would rise against them. But he knew that the first step had been taken. The truth had been spoken, and it could not be buried again. The individual had stood against the society that had sought to silence him, and in doing so had set the course for something greater. And though the path ahead was uncertain, Elyndor no longer feared the weight of the world upon his shoulders. He had seen the truth, and he had chosen to speak it. And in that choice he had found something that the council could never take from him, the power of the individual to shape the course of history. The weight of the truth. Elyndor stood on the steps of the Hall of Records, the city of Vareth stretching before him in the golden light of the setting sun. The air was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, the remnants of a world that had long been shaped by the hands of scribes and rulers alike. He had once believed that the order of the pen was a noble institution, a force of stability and knowledge. Now he saw it for what it was, a system built on silence, on the careful shaping of history to serve the will of those in power. He had not changed the world in a single night. The council still ruled, and the people of Vareth still lived under the illusion of order. But something had shifted. The truth had been spoken, and though the council had not yet acted, the weight of that truth was no longer confined to the halls of the order. It had found its way into the streets, into the minds of those who had once accepted the council's rule without question. And in that, Elyndor had found something greater than the fear of exile or death. He had found the power of the individual to shape the course of history. The manuscript in his hands was no longer a hidden secret, but a beacon. It had been passed from scribe to scribe, from those who had once feared to speak to those who now dared to question. It had become more than a record of the past. It had become a seed, planted in the hearts of those who had long been silenced. And though the council had not yet fallen, Elyndor knew that the first step had been taken. The people of Vareth had heard the truth, and they would not forget it. He looked out over the city, the spires of the council hall rising above the rooftops, their presence a reminder of the power that still ruled over Vareth. But he no longer saw them as an unchallenged force. He saw them as a system that had been built on the manipulation of history, on the suppression of dissent, on the careful shaping of the past to serve the present. And now, that past had been revealed. Elyndor did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if the council would fall, or if the people of Vareth would rise against them. But he knew that the truth had been spoken, and that the world could never be the same again. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.